We have a packed agenda because essentially we don't have just one demo. We have 4 demos with some theory in between. And the demos are structured in a way where each demo builds on top of the previous one. So the first demos might look a bit, let's say, simplistic, but the last one is close to a real-world scenario. So I didn't, want to just put everything in a single demo. I want to show how I'm building things from start to finish. And there is some theory in between. Okay, so time for the first demo, and I'm going to show this dashboard that I'm talking about. So now we are focusing on developers, and remember I said developers don't like anything else apart from code. If they need something else, they would like to have a button. So this is the Loft dashboard, and I'm not going to talk too much about it because it has great features that are already documented in the YouTube channel from Loft. But one of the central things that you can do here is, of course, you can create spaces, which is the same thing as namespaces. That's fine. But the magic thing is this button, Create Virtual Cluster. So as a developer, I log into this UI. And without caring about kubectl configs, authentication, service accounts, or whatever, I have a nice button that I click. I can optionally pick a template on the cluster. And if you're an administrator, you can put different templates. And let's say here I put my name of the cluster, so webinar demo. And then I click a button and boom, that's it. There is a new cluster created just for me that I can create. Now, of course, this is the basic use case. You can add here security. You can define exactly what goes into the cluster. You can create teams. You can create projects and set the security and make developers see only the products that they want. Loft also has a very nice CLI. So if you don't like the UI, even if you're a developer, you can also use the CLI and connect to the clusters and do whatever you want to do. So there, the cluster is ready. I got a cluster just for me in maybe 30 seconds. So developers are super happy about this. And I can equally delete the cluster when I don't need it anymore. So developers should be happy with this because they can get, a cluster quickly, but this is only half of the story. Like, okay, I got a cluster. What do I do next? The next obvious thing is I want to deploy there. And usually developers have, let's say, 2 needs. Either you want to deploy while you're developing a feature, so doing local development, or you want to deploy as part of a CI/CD pipeline. Now, we don't have time to show both scenarios. So today I'm going to show the second one. And this is the title of the webinar, using CI/CD pipelines. But if you want to know about local development, the next obvious thing would be to look at the other products from Loft. There is a DevSpace and DevPod that they do exactly that. And I'm super happy that I saw last week there is a YouTube video in the Loft YouTube channel that explains exactly the scenario, how you create a cluster with Loft, and then how you use it in order to start development using your IDE. So as far as I'm concerned, okay, developers should be happy right now for local development. They get what they want, at least until the feature is ready and needs to be pushed. Okay, so let's go back to the slides. So let's go to the second demo. So here I have already a repository. This is public in GitHub. I think I have the link later, but you can see it is not something private. And it has the code from all examples. The example that we are going to talk about today, right now, is super simple. There is only one Terraform file that you can see here. And essentially I'm saying, hey, I'm going to use the Terraform provider for Loft. And I define my clusters. And you can see this count here, and you can understand why this is important for operators. Because let's say I want to create 20 virtual clusters. I'm not going to go to the UI and click a button 20 times. I want an automated way. So this is a standard capability of Terraform. Here I have an example 3 because I'm in a very small cluster. But in theory, I could have 20 or 25 or 1,000 or whatever. So now, not with a single click of a button, but with a single Terraform command, I can create 3 clusters in my Loft instance. 3 is the example I'm going to use, but it could be 20. And you can see here Terraform says, hey, I'm going to add 3 things once you enter yes. So I enter yes, and now Terraform is creating the cluster. So I can go back to my UI, and you can see the clusters here getting created. So if I'm an operator, and let's say a developer comes to me and says, hey, I need 20 clusters, and I'm not going to click the create button 20 clusters, you say, that's not a problem. Let's use Terraform, and let's create the clusters right now. And if you're familiar with Terraform, you know that creating something is super easy, and also destroying something is super easy. So I can also run the destroy command, and just as easily as I created the clusters, I can also delete the clusters right away. So it's super easy to create and delete clusters on the spot, which is exactly what operators need. They want to create stuff quickly, tear it down quickly, and maybe if you want to do a quick test, you can run it right away. So this is how Terraform works with virtual clusters. So let's go back to the presentation. This is the link of the GitHub repo that has all the examples. So if you want to see how this code works, you can go there. So let's go back to the demo. So here I'm again an operator, and using Terraform on its own is fine, but now I want to automate Terraform itself. So I'm not going to run Terraform from my CLI. I'm going to run it from Codefresh. So here I have a Codefresh pipeline, which essentially says, hey, clone the source code, get access to the cluster, and you can see there are no credentials here. I'm just saying I'm going to use my real cluster, and then it runs Terraform. And this runs the same example as before. It creates several virtual clusters that you will see in Loft. So this pipeline is centrally in Codefresh. I don't need to have Terraform on my laptop. I don't need to know the credentials to the cluster. Everything is here. I run it, and essentially behind the scenes, it will do the same thing. It will go and create the clusters. And again, if you're familiar with Terraform, one question is how you use or how you set up the Terraform state. And the magic thing here is I have already gone and connected, like I did this before the webinar, the real cluster, my parent cluster. I connected it to Codefresh so that Codefresh knows about it. So if I go into this screen, right now Codefresh knows about the parent cluster. I've named the real cluster so that it's clear which clusters are real and which are not real. You can imagine next we will add virtual clusters. So this cluster is here once with authentication, and then this makes my pipeline super easy because I can just say, go to this cluster and deploy something, or use it as a Terraform state just by name. So this is what happens in this step. Here, if you see the YAML from this step, it just says use the real cluster and then do whatever you want. So this has created the clusters. I have created 4 clusters in 15 seconds, okay, which is super fast. And then just for fun, I'm also using the CLI to verify the clusters. So now I have 4 clusters here. And again, you can imagine I had 20 clusters or 25 clusters. So what have I gained now? Now I have gained the capability to also work in a GitOps style. Because I'm not using my local workstation, I have actually this example in this GitHub repo that I mentioned before. So this example is in multi-clusters remote. And here I can start a Git workflow. So let's say I created these 4 clusters for my developers, and then one of the developers says, hey, we need 2 more clusters. Okay, what do? I do what every, let's say, developer would do. I can come here into this file that defines the number of clusters, remember the count, and I say, okay, this team needs now 6 clusters. Okay, so I change 4 to 6, and I can commit the change. I'm not going to commit them here. Maybe I will create a new branch, and I will name it 2 more clusters. 2 more clusters, proposed change. So I have now created a pull request, and then you can follow the workflow that you have in your company for your pull request. So maybe, in your team, somebody needs to approve changes in infrastructure. So you can assign this to your team lead or the other team and say, hey, I'm going to do this. Do you agree? And the magic thing here is I have created a second pipeline, because unlike some products that I'm not going to name, Codefresh has the capability to have multiple pipelines for the same repo. And this is a separate pipeline that says preview. And essentially, it's similar like this, but if you are familiar with Terraform, instead of running Terraform apply, it runs Terraform plan. So this will run, and it will not actually do anything at all. It will just say what will happen if I will merge this pull request. So this is the one that is running right now, but we can go to one of the previous ones. And if we look at the log, there it said, I think this was the same example, hey, I'm going to add 2 more clusters and change your clusters. So not only I have a pull request here, but I actually get some indication of what will happen if I merge that pull request. So from this point onwards, even operators, are happy because they don't have, let's say, to communicate and say, hey, I'm going to do this. Do you agree or not? You can work with Git and Terraform exactly the same way as you want. And just to close this example, we can do the same thing as before. There is a pipeline that does Terraform destroy. So after I'm finished, let's say my developer says, I don't need these clusters anymore. I can run the pipeline, and then it will use the same Terraform state using the parent cluster, and then it will destroy the clusters after it's finished. Okay, so we don't need to wait for this. Let's go back to the slides. And let's say the final demo, the most complex one, hopefully it will work. So just before I start, I want to show you some important things. First of all, I showed you the cluster integration screen where you say to Codefresh which cluster you have. And right now, I'm going to show you that there is only one cluster. It's the real cluster. Okay, that's the only thing that Codefresh knows right now. I'm also going to show you my connection to Docker Hub. So I've already created Docker Hub connection here. So the pipeline I'm going to create will say, let's compile the code and push it to Docker Hub. And developers don't need to know anything about how it works and how it's authenticated. And the last thing I'm going to show you is Codefresh also has a dashboard for environments, which right now is completely empty. It doesn't have anything at all. So the thing I have done here, by the way, the other demo has finished and the clusters are destroyed. So here I have already gone ahead and created, let's say, a repository, which is my, let's say, template, the starter project. This is a Go code. And let's assume that in my team, I have agreed and say every microservice should be written with these files and these things and these pipelines. So this is my starting point. And then I'm going to go to my Loft demo project here in Codefresh, and I will click the most complex pipeline ever, create everything. Yes, this is why I call it like this, create everything. So let's run it. So essentially, this is the scenario where I'm an operator and the developer comes to me and says, hey, I'm creating a brand new application, give me everything I need. And the only thing I do is press this button, nothing else. Now, while it's running, I'm going to show you a bit the code. I'm not going to go into too many, Terraform details because this webinar is not about Terraform. But essentially, it has 3 clusters. Let's assume the developer will use QA, staging, and prod. And this is how I define them in Terraform. And actually here I'm taking advantage of the feature I mentioned before. So just for fun, you can see this cluster is K3S, while this cluster is K0S, and this cluster is standard Kubernetes. So if a developer says, I want to test different Kubernetes versions, they can do it just fine. Then I have some manifest, which have standard things like ingresses for exposing the clusters, which I don't think it's important right now. And then these are the pipelines. So even though I clicked a button, behind the scenes, everything is stored in Git, and I can follow the exact same procedure later if I want to change something. So if I want another cluster, I can go and create a pull request. So like before, we start and we say we're choosing the real cluster. This is I have named like here. So this is the real cluster. And then I'm creating the virtual clusters. And in this case, they will take some more time because I'm also creating ingresses for them. So they are going to be externally accessible if a developer wants to work there and connect their application. Then just for fun, I'm also going to create the virtual clusters. And then the rest of the steps are Codefresh specific, which for this webinar are not really that important. It's this. This is not, let's say, a good thing to do in production. It's essentially the privileges and the airbag controls that you give to Codefresh what to do in the clusters. Because these are virtual clusters, remember these are virtual clusters that I'm creating. Essentially, I'm saying be an admin and do whatever you want because I don't really care. They are virtual. And then the final thing is making Codefresh aware of those clusters. And then, as I said, create the pipelines that developers themselves will use. So remember, this is the pipeline I use as an SRE, but I want also to give access to a developer for actually building the application. So this has finished. So you can see I created the 3 external accessible clusters with ingresses in 1 minute and 30 seconds. Remember, I said that usually in a cloud provider, you need 15 minutes at least for creating a real cluster. Now in 1 minute, I created 3 clusters, and then I can say to the developers, do whatever you want. So the rest of the process will finish super fast, I think. You can see the timings here. And after this is done, we should also see, after this step is done, we should also see that now Codefresh is aware about the new clusters. So I'm going to visit the integration screen of Kubernetes that we saw before. If you remember, it was only the real cluster. But now after it finishes, let's see, it finished some of the clusters. I can go here into my settings and look at now the clusters that are known to Codefresh. And if I go now to clusters, you can see that now Codefresh knows about 4 clusters. And I've named them, just to be clear, this is the real cluster, the parent cluster that has everything. And these are the 3 brand new clusters that I created, and they are completely virtual, and Codefresh knows how to deploy. So now I can do everything I want with Codefresh, and these clusters now are available by name. So a developer can say, hey, I want to deploy to this cluster named prod, and they don't care about kubeconfig files or authentication or anything else. So let's see if the everything else has finished. Okay, so now it has finished. So if you go now to GitHub, there should be a brand new repository, which is for developers, and this is my Loft app. And also in Codefresh, there is a brand new project. So you see, this is the project I was working, and now there is a brand new project that was created automatically. And this has the pipeline for developers. So now I say to my developers, hey, I'm done. Now you can deploy your application. And this is a normal standard pipeline that I'm going to run that takes the source code of the microservice, compiles it, pushes it to Docker Hub, and then, as an example, I'm deploying it to the QA cluster. And in a more complex example, I would create more pipelines that promote things from QA to staging, to production, and to the other things. So this is what I did as an operator. This is what I did behind the scenes. You can see it took me like 5 minutes. And without opening any ticket, without any lengthy process, I say to my developer, hey, your GitHub repo is fine. It's ready. Here is your pipeline for deploying. And now the developers can focus only on deploying code. So they can check out the repository, they can make a change, and this pipeline is already set up to run automatically for them. So as soon as they make a change, it will be deployed to the QA environment right away. So everybody's super happy. Developers got what they want. As an operator, I did, let's say, a super quick action of just clicking a button. Everything is stored in Git. There isn't, any fancy API. I know exactly what is in the cluster. I know exactly what is in the pipeline. I know exactly what goes where. And then if somebody asks me, hey, how much time it takes for a new microservice to spin up, I can say 5 minutes. And not just me, I mean the developer as well. So this will take some time to build Docker image, but this is actually the end. So I think we can go back to the slides.